The sitting is resumed.
Mr. President, order number 6. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill 2024.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am on my feet this evening to present the bill, the Criminal Procedure Act, Cap 127. Mr. President, in non-technical terms, non-legal terms, this bill simply, but in a very complex way, provides for Barbados to introduce a system of judge-only trials. It provides a system, Mr. President, that does not, for the record, replace the existing judge by jury, the right of an accused person to be judged by a jury of their peers. It allows, under the amendment, Mr. President, captured in the bill, and I will go through it in a short while, it allows for a person to be in a position where they can elect, they can choose to have a judge-only trial under the following conditions. Mr. President, the judge-only trial would apply only to matters where the trial has actually commenced and the accused person must do that election, make that choice at the time of arraignment. Secondly, Mr. President, it applies in the instances where the case is closed on both sides and the judge therefore must give his decision as soon as is practical, but before the expiration of 14 days. It also requires, Mr. President, that the judge must give a written judgment at the time of conviction, giving the reasons for that verdict. And where a person is acquitted, the judge may, at his option, give written reasons for that verdict. And so, Mr. President, those are the, in principle, framing concepts for the judge-only trial as captured in the legislation. I will not, because I am not an attorney. I have attorneys who are very capable in this honorable chamber who will, I am sure, in great detail go over the merits and the demerits of a judge-only system, and I will defer to their wisdom. But I will take the opportunity, Mr. President, to go over the bill, even if it is with a light touch. Mr. President, the amendments that are being made in principle are, in the first instance, an amendment to Section 3 of Cap 127, where we are speaking about making changes to the mode of trial that is captured in the Section 3 of the legislation, and it reads as follows: every person against whom a bill of indictment has been preferred shall, subject to the provisions of this Act, be tried by a judge sitting with a jury unless he elects to be tried by a judge sitting alone. Now, Mr. President, sometime during the course of last year, under the office of the Attorney General, the Honourable Attorney General, Barbados hosted a symposium where they looked at a range of issues that came up as it related to legal reform. This was one of the matters that came up as a consequence or during the course of that deliberation in that symposium. And so you've already seen, or you've already heard, certainly from me and from the debate in the other place, about the mode of trial as captured in Section 3 of Cap 127. The second amendment, Mr. President, is Section 7, which speaks about amending the existing section and making a deletion, which allows for the following language to be included in great detail. I wouldn't go into it in any great detail. It will be done over the course of this debate, but it speaks about elements where, Mr. President, the judge shall, if a person arraigned on indictment pleads not guilty, inform the person that he may elect to be tried by a jury sitting alone or a judge sitting with a jury. I spoke about that earlier. That is captured in Section 7, Mr. President. And then there are further amendments also in Section 7, but Section 7B, C, D, and E, which speaks about the jurisdiction of the judge, references to jury in other enactments, the judge giving reasons for his decision. I've spoken about that as well, Mr. President, and what I didn't mention at the time was that where the person is acquitted, the judge also may, at his option, give a written reason for the verdict, but the prosecution may request reasons for the verdict if none are given, and the judge is to give those reasons also within 14 days. That is captured in subsection 7 of the legislation, Mr. President. Section 9 of the Principal Act is also being amended as captured in the draft of the bill. And then further in section 9A of the legislation, as proposed, there is a provision for a special verdict where accused persons are found guilty but insane at the date of the act charged. These are the amendments, Mr. President, in summary form, but they speak to an overall thrust by the Office of the Attorney General and by this government more generally to legal reform as a matter of priority for this government. Much of our legislation is very dated, and what you have seen as we have sat in this honourable chamber, certainly over the last 6 years, has been a consistent attempt by the Office of the Attorney General to systematically reform and replace dated legislation. We have already before us, Mr. President, the Law Reform Commission, chaired by Sir David Simmons, retired Chief Justice. We have the Parliamentary Reform Commission, which is looking at all of the elements relating to our parliamentary system and the legislation guiding that, as well as the big ticket item on constitutional reform, Mr. President, that looks at reforming our overall constitution. We have a number of pieces of very dated legislation, Mr. President, that are now up for review. And that, Mr. President, will constitute what we all hope as a government will be a new suite of legislation ushering Barbados, perhaps belatedly nevertheless, into the third generation of the 21st century sooner rather than later. Mr. President, I will give, as I started at the beginning, a very light touch to this piece of legislation. The amendments before us. There has been an extensive debate, Mr. President, certainly in the other place and in the public space as well. And I want to address just 2 items here. One, that the former Chief Justice in his submissions would have engaged, along with the Office of the Attorney General, with the Barbados Bar Association to get their views through their representative bodies so that they would be in a position to give their feedback on the mechanisms. In any institution, in any association, there are always going to be conflicting views, and that is okay. All views contend, and we come to a consensus at the end of that debate. So the Bar Association is a part of the process that must be going forward, and you have heard, even in the media, differing views on how they expect it to be implemented. And then finally, Mr. President, I want to also make the point that it really is about the commitment of the government of Barbados to ensuring that the legal system continues to benefit not just from reforms, but from the provision of the necessary resources that are necessary to make it efficient and effective. It remains imperfect. There are not enough resources in the legal system. There are still some areas that need to be done, to be looked at. But what I can say is that significant progress has been made, certainly in the introduction of additional judges being appointed, the introduction of additional courts, and the plans which have already been put in the public domain for further changes to be made in terms of specialist courts. And so, Mr. President, I commend this bill to this honourable chamber, and I beg to move that it be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the bill currently under consideration, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill, 2024, has serious implications for the criminal justice system in Barbados. And I think as a result, our discussion merits an examination of the background to the bill, in the sense that it is important that Barbadians, Barbados' nationals, and probably some visitors, because they may want to opt for a judge on trial, understand where we're coming from, where we may end up. And I will start by saying jury trials and jury service play a crucial role in our justice system, criminal justice system in particular. Because while they can be juries in some civil matters, that is really not a normal feature nowadays of our justice system on the civil side. And juries were designed to ensure that defendants, the accused person, is fairly and impartially judged by what is considered to be their peers, a representative group of a cross-section of the society that is like that accused. And this group of people are citizens selected at random to hear the evidence and to come to a conclusion on the facts in the matter. To decide, is the accused person guilty? Is the accused person innocent? And jury panels will sit in the trial. They're typically used in our higher courts. And as they listen, the accused person is supposed to get a sense that there is fairness embedded in that process. And the jury system, of course, allows for, in some instances, a unanimous vote is required, or there are instances in which a vote by majority is required. And so that one of the main advantages of the jury trial system is that notion that you will be judged by your peers. There's a lot of debate as to what constitutes your peers, but essentially it's somebody from the community. And one of the advantages of the jury system that we see discussed in other, what should we say, in other countries where the mechanism of a judge alone trial has been implemented, and in some instances for some time now, is that the jury, because there are practitioners who will always feel uneasy about the judge alone mechanism, is that the jury trial also allows for diversity, so that you're not being judged by this one person who will have their own considerations, their own biases and experiences. And so that's supposed to kind of level the playing field for the accused person. And the accused person is there because they're facing some penalty, a fine, incarceration, maybe both. And I think we will see the jury in action in particular where that person is facing incarceration. And so having those perspectives presented when the jury sits, that diverse perspective in looking at the evidence, is supposed to enhance, provide a fair and a just outcome. Some people, however, also comment that it could actually have the opposite effect, because they too come with their biases. And particularly in our environment, where, particularly in this environment, a small community, when you look at the size of Barbados and the size of the potential jury pool, and we come to the fact that oftentimes crimes are reported on in Barbados, and therefore those people have seen those reports. We also have the impact of social media. We have now in the system concerns about whether fairness is compromised when the jury sits, particularly when you're coming from such a small pool. On the other hand, juries are seen to play a vital role in protecting the rights of a defendant, and because theoretically, because you have more people considering the facts, there is less opportunity for a mistake to be made compared to if one person is considering the fact. And a lot of these notions are based on an examination of a criminal justice system that has existed for multiple centuries and obviously developed over time, but you know, it's operating every day, and there's an opportunity to examine and conclude or arrive at various perspectives or conclusions on how it works, where it has deficiencies, and where those holes may be plugged, in some instances by a mechanism such as the mechanism that we're considering today. And on the other hand, proponents and opponents cite disadvantages and advantages of a judge-alone trial. And advantages include, Mr. President, an expectation that a judge-alone trial will be completed more quickly than a jury trial. In Barbados, we don't have to concern ourselves so much about the time that it takes for jury selection. We don't have that lengthy process that exists in some jurisdictions, to the extent that consultants, experts come and tell you, this is a good juror, you don't want that one, et cetera, and it can take some time. We have some things, some objection opportunities embedded, but we don't have that lengthy a process normally. And however, the efficiency can come from a judge who is an expert being able to be more efficient with time, being able to examine what is before him with more speed than a jury of lay people might be able to address the issues before them. And that expertise also equips the judge to better understand and apply the law in the case. He doesn't have to instruct himself, as he may have to instruct a jury when certain matters might arise during a trial. And it is believed, therefore, that's a generalized statement, but I'm going to stick to it. Juries may serve us better in looking at the facts, and therefore protecting the interests of the accused in that way. A judge may serve us better when we judge alone, when we are looking at highly technical evidence, and when we are looking at issues of law. I don't think that that's disputable. That is common sense. And I think we can arrive at that conclusion when we look at how a trial will proceed and issues that could come up and the processes that are involved in a trial, where a judge may have to issue instructions to a jury, may actually have to say to a jury, we're not going to discuss this matter in front of you, the voir dire as we call it. And so there are various elements that will help us to understand where a judge may be more effective and efficient than a jury. And on the other hand, very interestingly, an advantage that is often cited is fairness. So some will argue that because the judge is operating as an expert, the judge is better able to put aside biases. And so we see that there's some contention in how we look at whether a judge-alone trial or a jury trial operates in the system and affects the rights and the interests of an accused person. Defense counsel, on the other hand, will want to, obviously, not we, because I don't do criminal practice, defense counsel will often be counseling the accused person on whether they will want to take this option. And defense counsel will take certain matters into consideration, I think, naturally, when they're making that determination or offering that counsel. Because we counsel, and then we're given instructions, and we have to do what our client instructs us to do. And so you can expect that defense counsel will be concerned to opt for a judge-alone trial where there has been inflammatory or prejudicial pre-trial publicity. And I spoke about that before. And we are in a world where it's out there. Everybody's discussing everything. We've had instances here where bloggers or a blogger has been warned about commentary, and our community is small. And so I think lawyers would be concerned about that. Lawyers would be concerned where you're looking at complex matters, technical matters, forensic evidence, and the concern that the prosecutor may be able to, dazzle a jury with some fancy footwork and some interesting technical information, whereas the judge should not be impacted in the same way. And that obviously goes to the fairness of the consideration of the facts in trial. And the other thing I think that defense counsel will be concerned about is where we look at the accused record, as we call it, whether they're known to the court, or even if just out there in the community, they're known to be troublesome, a bad boy, they have an unsavory past. And again, whether that information is out there and may affect a jury. Another consideration, of course, is the issue of the possibility of tainting a jury. And so when we look at these contending issues, there is another one I would like to also cite, and that is where we're looking at factual matters before the court, evidence that we would normally hear in camera because it involves a minor, in particular sexual offenses, and the defense counsel may feel more comfortable if we are dealing with that, not having to expose that evidence, whether it is verbal or they're looking at photographs, for example, and we're talking about a minor. So there are instances in which it is accepted that counsel may feel more comfortable with a judge alone. But of course, counsel will always contend that there was a comment earlier that when we were looking at the amendment, the lawyers in the room were all scribbling furiously. I don't know if we were all writing the same thing, but we have some hardwired responses, and a hardwired response will it be fair? Will there be bias? Can I feel comfortable that when a judge is sitting by himself, my client will not suffer from the judge's peculiarities? And I think it is important that we can, I don't want to use the word trust, but repose some confidence in the expertise, the learning, the training, the experience of the judge when they are performing that role, when they're sitting on the bench. That's important because we have to feel that way if we're going to appear before them, but we're also confronted with the realities that a judge is a human being. And so embedded in the law, we treat to the issue of bias because it occurs. And so these are the contending issues. They're not to be dismissed because I think we can expect that lawyers in Barbados are going to judge the effectiveness or the efficacy of judge-alone trials against those various considerations that I outlined. And Mr. President, because I don't practice criminal law, you know, people make references to criminal lawyers. I don't like that term. I don't like it at all. Because, that's right. Or practitioners are at the criminal, I can't even say criminal bar because that doesn't sound so good either. But because I don't, I had a look around and to get a sense of what has happened in jurisdictions that have gone this route. We're not the first. Some in the region have, but there are jurisdictions that have done it for a very long time. In particular, Canada, Australia. And out of Australia, I found some commentary, particularly coming out of New South Wales, and they actually did a review. And the survey that they did threw up certain results. In particular, that compared to jury trials, judge-alone trials were associated with an increase in the probability of an acquittal. And I don't think anybody expected that. And you have to contend with that. And that's even when you from a data collection perspective, after controlling for the characteristics that may affect the outcome. And judge-alone trials were also associated with shorter custodial penalties. And I think that is a result of expertise. And it was also determined that judge-alone trials tended to be shorter, the amount of time that they took. And in addition, legal practitioners in New South Wales suggested that the difference in acquittals could be resulting because judges apply a higher threshold of what constitutes beyond reasonable doubt. And so that's important because you can say to a person who is not legally trained that this is how it's supposed to work, but they still have to contend with the theory that underlies that. For us, I've always personally thought, how interesting, and I think wrong, that lawyers can't sit on juries. Like for me, we're the perfect people to be on juries. Well, that's another issue. You'd have the pool and you'd choose some people. But that's a conversation that I have with myself from time to time. But of course, I understand why. And that, I only say that to myself because for me, our technical knowledge would assist in making that determination and would probably raise a standard. That is exactly what those lawyers in New South Wales have pointed to, a difference in the standard. And another thing that they have cited is that judges are required to provide detailed reasons, and in introducing the bill, Senator Cummings explained to us that that is a feature of our bill. Juries don't have to say why. Juries come and say, not guilty. And that's it, everybody goes away, or guilty. But the judge must say, this is why I have come to that conclusion, and that necessarily, I think obviously, assists in the issue of, I want an appeal. This is what I will present to the court. That's an important thing for us to consider as well, because we're not saying judge alone and that's it. We do have an appeal system. There are 2 levels above that high court judge who will sit as a judge alone. So that's a built-in protection that we mustn't forget. I think that's very important. Perhaps it was said in the debate in the other place. I will confess that I have not had the opportunity to listen to that debate, but I think we must reassure the public that that is a feature of our system that remains. That's very important. And the requirement for a written explanation of the decision will, I think, enhance fairness for an accused person when they consider, if they're convicted and they're considering an appeal. And also from the same study, Mr. President, it was unanimously believed that judge-alone trials are shorter due to increased written evidence rather than in-person testimony. I think we can understand. But that's something that I'm going to come to a little bit later, because I do have a specific concern about this bill. And one of the things I think we also, it's interesting actually, it's not particularly necessary to say, but it is interesting that we have trialed the judge-alone trial, and this is something that other jurisdictions have had to face because COVID was upon us, and online court did not facilitate juries. And you would understand why. If a person is off there in their home, nobody can control what they're doing. Well, you know, I would use the term mass confusion, but it would be inherently unfair and undermine a system that is supposed to protect the accused person. So courts worldwide had to abandon that mechanism. It obviously is a further catalyst to something that we've considered before, but it tells you that it can work. Let me put it that way. And so I say that to say this. Having had that experience, there are many bad things that came out of COVID, but having had that experience, I think the results of the New South Wales report are generalizable, probably across the world. When we look at, is this a valid system that we should adopt? And Mr. President, of course, the Bar Association has indeed looked at this for some time. When I was, trying to scroll through to see if we start to look at it before 2020, I didn't pursue that. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. But I know we've been looking at it for a long time, and it's been a lot of back and forth, and we've looked at it, there's been a hiatus, and then we've come back, I suppose, immediately before the bill was drafted and tabled. Mr. President, I want to focus on, in particular, on Section 7 of the amendment to Section 7 of the Principal Act. And I'm going to quote from the section. I'm going to read the entire amendment. Section 7 of the Principal Act is amended by deleting subsection 1 and substituting the following. The judge shall, if a person arraigned on indictment pleads not guilty, inform the person that he may elect to be tried by a judge sitting alone or a judge sitting with a jury. 1A, where the person referred to in subsection 1, upon being arraigned, elects to be tried by a judge sitting alone, the court shall only make an order that the person be tried by a jury sitting alone if it is satisfied that the person, B, has sought and received legal advice from an attorney at law in relation to a trial by judge sitting alone, and has filed with the registrar of the Supreme Court a certificate in the form set out as Form A in the first schedule. That is not the particular provision that I'm concerned with, but I cite it because that form A, is a written confirmation that the defendant, the accused, has sought and received advice from their attorney at law on electing to be tried by a judge sitting alone. And that form says, I've been advised of my rights. I understand. and I'm exercising this option. That's me paraphrasing. So here's where my concern comes in. I will quote. 1B, where a person is not represented by an attorney at law and elects to be tried by a judge sitting alone, the court shall make an order that the person be tried by a judge sitting alone if it is satisfied that the person A is competent and has waived his right to consult an attorney at law for legal advice in relation to a trial by a judge sitting alone, and B has filed with the registrar of the Supreme Court a certificate in the form set out as Form B in the first schedule. End quote. Mr. President, what does Form B say? Form B is called the Certificate of Confirmation of Legal Advice on electing for trial by judge sitting alone. I'm going to insert the name Jane Doe when I read the next part. I, Jane Doe, confirm that I have not sought and received advice from an attorney at law on the matter of me electing to be tried by a judge sitting alone. I have waived my right to consult an attorney for legal advice in relation to a trial by judge sitting alone. I elect to be tried by a judge sitting alone and agree to it without reservation. No promise, inducement, threat, coercion, force of any kind was employed to secure my election of this mode of trial. I voluntarily and of my free will agree to it. I am satisfied with representing myself in this matter. My concern, Mr. President, is that the judge sitting alone should not be judge, jury, and independent legal advisor. I'm concerned about that. And of course, we know that a person can represent themselves in court. We also know what we say about that person's client. However, and that happens, it can happen, and normally, as I said before, in civil matters, we will hardly see a jury. However, very importantly, this initiative has to recognize the implications for the person who is most important in this scenario, and that is the accused person. And the stakes for that person accused of that crime, particularly if they're being tried for a serious crime carrying the possibility of incarceration or even the death penalty, because murder is not excluded. The implications, the stakes are extremely high. When I say extremely high, I think that is an understatement. So, Mr. President, I think that if we're going to utilize a judge-alone system, we must, and I'm going to emphasize must, we must be prepared to provide counsel to the accused person, even if that person, that counsel, is just acting as amicus curiae, observing, but can step in to give independent legal advice. Because, and I understand that there are costs and procedural implications that would be introduced into the system, but that's a question of management. And if the government does that, it is just paying the price of assuring justice. And I think that is critical, because justice at its heart has procedural fairness. Procedural fairness resides, it is the beating heart of justice. And I get uncomfortable at the idea that a person who might even, I don't know, they have to be compos mentis, but they don't have to be ultra intelligent. They don't have to be sophisticated. And they might not understand. And I am concerned about that, Mr. President. Perhaps it is a feature of other systems, but I think that we have to consider our peculiarities, our history, and we have to represent our people. We have to make things right for them. And we have to be concerned, Mr. President, about justice. Justice for us may well be something different from justice in other jurisdictions. And we have to contend with that issue. So we can't just say we're going to do this to fix a backlog or what have you, but we have to be, the backlog is not the issue. It's there. But in fixing the backlog, we are affecting people. And we are affecting people that oftentimes come from situations where they are not empowered, they don't have resources, they don't have sophistication. They are obviously at that time are under pressure, under the hammer, as it were. And so we have to orient our decisions about this in that context. It can't be a focus on the backlog. It has to be a focus on the accused person and how they interact with this new system that the government is interested in. I'm going to take this opportunity to say I'm supporting it. And I understand that the senators on the government side are a little shocked today. Like, what? Twice in one day? They will recover, Mr. President. It won't always be so. What I will say will ignore the side remarks, but what I will say is I will support what makes sense to me. What I will not do is wholeheartedly accept it without commenting on elements of it that I have concerns about, Mr. President. And I have a strong concern about this. And I don't accept that we will lift something from anywhere else. I never accept that for legislation for Barbados, because we then find ourselves down the road grappling with things that are inappropriate. And I think we can shape things. And when I consider a system of counsel being provided, I think we should put the resources behind it. I think it would be money well spent. And we have a lot of lawyers who I expect would be happy, even if just at the early stages of their career. They're lawyers who are committed to defense, criminal defense. And so they would very likely participate in such a system. And I'm not talking about legal aid, I'm talking about a government-run system, a defense system, state defense counsel system, where the government either hires or contracts defense counsel. Defense counsel will show up in court if assigned, because a person has shown that they want to consider the offer of a judge alone system. I think that's something that the government would do well to consider, to cost and to implement, and it can be incremental. We can, start slow or with just a few people and increase it according to the take-up. Mr. President, I exhort the government to look at it. I think we can do how we can do this as a nation, because for me this would be one lever in a system of restorative justice that our country cries out for. Because the people who find themselves before the court are the people who are descendants of people who suffered most in our history. This is a fact. It is indisputable. We have to put some resources. When we talk about correcting wrongs, when we talk about reparations, that is a practical mechanism to shoehorn under our own initiative reparations into our criminal justice system. Don't let the accused person be out there begging for themselves and hoping that the judge will be kind to them because they're facing a judge alone, and hoping that the judge will act as their independent legal counsel, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've already said, and I will repeat, I said in the previous debate, and I think it merits repeating, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Bill refers to some 5 acts that will be amended. So when Senator Cummins went through the amendments, that's the amendment to the Criminal Procedure Act. But there are 5 others that are mentioned in the consequential amendments. Those acts are the Theft Act, the Sexual Offences Act, the Offences Against the Person Act, the Evidence Act, the Criminal Appeal Act. These amendments are not small orders made by a minister under a regulation. Those are major things. And it is important that we understand that when we see that kind of amendment, that senators, as legislators, we consider, by looking at those acts, and perhaps have them provided, what those amendments are. Because we know we have a challenge with finding legislation, no matter how old it is. I know how I can find some of the old acts. Okay? Everybody will not have access to the entire volume of statutes. But I think that in enhancing our work, it would perhaps be helpful if we can have the legislation that is affected by the consequential amendments and any senator, any member of this chamber who wants to review and, look at the pathway to the amendment can do so. I think that is really important. It will enhance our work. And when it comes to legislation like this, that is about life, liberty, pursuit of freedom, that is critical and it's not to be scoffed at, Mr. President. This also, I would say, because there are those amendments, 5 pieces of legislation, and there's another reason why counsel should be provided. Independent legal counsel must be a feature. You could say to a person, sign something that says, I was not coerced. I am compos mentis. But the person might not be able to assess and assimilate. And just to get past the process, may say to a judge, yes, I understand. I think we have to be very careful about that, Mr. President. Very, very careful. That has an element of inherent unfairness that, I use this term already, people like it, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. It makes me uncomfortable, and I really would ask the government to look back at that. I understand that it requires infrastructure and resources and so on, so it's not an immediate mechanism, but it is a worthwhile system to have built into our criminal justice system, particularly when we consider a judge sitting alone and rendering a decision on criminality. Mr. President, I didn't intend to be long. I don't think I've been that long. And so I give cautious support. Like the lawyers who have commented, have given cautious support. I believe the Bar Association has given cautious support to this bill. I accept what the intent is. I give cautious support with the caveats that I have stated here. And I think we, practitioners, and most certainly the opposition Democratic Labour Party, can be expected, and we will, as this mechanism is implemented, we can be expected. I certainly will commit to staying vigilant on this matter, Mr. President. And with those short remarks, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. Sorry, Senator Watson. The speakers, Senator Kevin Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure we all forgive that Freudian comment. It happens. Sir, the debate and the legislation which is before us has occupied a significant amount of national attention. Surprisingly, and I would say almost proudly, there has been little fear-mongering. There has been some concern, of course, expressed in certain quarters, but there has been little fear-mongering for what some could view as an erosion of a traditional right. But that would be a fallacy in the fact that what makes this legislation so tasty, I think, for public consumption is that the accused is given the choice. And I think that was stressed repeatedly in the lower house, that what we're discussing is an amendment to legislation which says the accused person can elect to be tried by a judge or elect to be tried by a jury. For a variety of reasons, someone would want to have a jury. For a variety of reasons, someone will not want to have a jury. And the procedure is one which starts at the beginning of the trial process. So you'll see in the legislation, you know I like to refer to legislation, Mr. President, you'll see in the legislation words like indictment and arraign. Arraigned, of course, is the first appearance when you go before the magistrate. and you are required to plead, or you say whether you're guilty or not guilty. And sir, many a lawyer will tell you that despite the best of advice given to persons at that stage, there is never any guarantee as to what words will be uttered. You can be shocked at what people say when being put with that choice, sir. What this legislation contemplates, though, is that at that stage, at the conception of the process which determines your liberty or incarceration, an election is made as to whether you will be doing that process by a judge alone or with a jury of your quote-unquote peers in quotation marks. The legislation lays out clearly, sir, that the judge has to be very clear that certain advice is given in relation to the election. And of course, and as always with law, there's a requirement for a certificate to be filed. Judge also, if there is no lawyer, make sure that the accused is competent, which sometimes in itself occurs, and a need for fact-checking, sir, is required when there is a lawyer. But that's an aside. If there is a joint trial, in other words, there's more than one person who is charged, a joint criminal enterprise, 2 or 3 persons in a car with a firearm, that type of thing, sir, all will have to agree in relation to the election. So all in all, I think the intent of the legislation makes sense, and the procedural safeguards are to be commended. There is a specific requirement that the judge is to make sure the accused understands the difference between a trial by judge and a trial by jury. And while this is all good, the most troubling part for me when I was going through the legislation was found a bit lower down, in that there is a requirement that when the judge gives the decision has to be given in writing in 14 days. In 2 weeks, the judges who hear the trial have to give the decision and give it in writing, I assume with reasons as to why the decision was given. Sir, in my, I'm a bit ashamed to say, 2 decades at the bar plus, a decision in writing in 2 weeks, albeit a civil bar, would be considered somewhat uncommon, sir. And I believe that this requirement places an onerous task on our existing criminal judges who are valiantly chipping away at the backlog to give a decision within 14 days. But so be it. If this is the standard that we are setting, the only caution I would urge is, have we given them the resources to give the decisions in writing in 14 days? I believe, sir, that a recent statement was carried in the press out of Guyana where the Chief Justice had to say, are we not humans? If you cut us, we would bleed, in terms of the expectations being placed on them by the government. We have a scenario where we see in our sister republic down south in Trinidad where the judges with all their resources, I heard of one puny judge who was recently appointed who had 5 assistants, can't get decisions out because of the quantum We are now saying that under this legislation, decisions have to be given in writing in these instances where a judge hears a trial in 14 days. I don't know if it can be done, but certainly it is a goal to aim for. Now, sir, supporters of this legislation, they're called judicial reformists, sir. And they say that it will help with the backlog, reduce the time, and therefore cut down the amount of cases we have at the criminal bar. Supporters say, look, coming out of COVID, we learned what we could do. We were able to hear matters by way of teleconference. Prisoners did not have to leave from down at Dodds. They can come forward and they were put on the screen, and we were able to adapt to the new circumstances. So we can do this. There are those who say that when you have a judge alone, it reduces the risk of a jury who could be infected by what I call the new perennial problem of social media, where you have intense media coverage and you have to select a jury from that small pool that we have in Barbados, a very small pool. Perhaps having a judge alone would reduce the risk of any influence. However, as always, there's a counterpoint. Like my friend Senator Watson, we look to Australia for guidance, one, because our evidence law follows Australia. So when you hear lawyers, Mr. President, talk about Australia, it's not that we like the land down under or we support the create, nothing like that. It's because our Evidence Act is based on the Australian Evidence Act, not the UK, so we look to Australia for certain guidance. And in Australia, where in certain states they have judge-only trials, they of course have attendance studies. So the one I'm referring to, sir, is a 2018 study with a lovely title, Differential or Deferential to Media. A very nice title. The Effect of Prejudicial Publicity on Judge and Jury by McEwen, Elridge, and Caruso. And in this study, it was found that there was actually little clear evidence that judges were immune from social prejudice. But maybe that's just in Australia. The point is, sir, trials without juries have been done. They have been successfully implemented in certain jurisdictions. And coming out of that, though, in places where they have been doing it, there are certain points which I thought might be useful for the government, who's always listening, to consider implementing in the future. Number one is when you have a judge, so remember we spoke about indictment and arraignment. I'm going to come back to this arraignment thing. Arraignment is when the matter starts. So what some person says, well, the judge who is hearing the matter as to whether to do a judge trial or a jury trial, let's use that definitive term, should not be the judge who actually does the judge trial. The reason being is that they realize that certain lawyers are guiding the accused to do judge shopping. So if you get this judge, you say, well, I want him or her to do the trial because I know the track record. So what they suggest is that the legislation provide that the judge who makes the determination when it's a judge or jury trial not be the one who does the judge trial. In other words, the judge assesses, no. If you want to pick judge trial, fine, my brother Nichols will hear the matter, or it goes back to the pool for the judges. You don't get to pick me because you see me and you like me and you want me to do the judge trial. So that's one suggestion, sir. Another suggestion would be that there be a restriction on which matters could be done by a judge alone. And what guides this principle is that there is an indication that there are certain matters which require a community standard. So let's say we're talking about something as indelicate as indecency. Having one person, albeit a wise, erudite judge, make the assessment as to what our community standard is for indecency would obviously not be as strong as having 12 or 9 persons make that assessment. Indeed, if I ask Senator King what his idea of a decent calypso is, when he was in his other prime, because he's still in his prime, compared to what is being touted now, as a society, what we say is acceptable now may not have been acceptable in the days of Johnny Maboy, as he then was, sir. Sir, another factor is that for certain matters, such as terrorism and treason, that they be kept within the realm of jury and not be subject to election. But again, I believe, sir, that there will come a time when we look at this again, and perhaps then we will have the further discussion. Now, the arguments against, because we must keep this delicate balance, the arguments against the judge-only trial is that, of course, it goes against the tradition, wherein you're judged by a jury of your peers. Another argument against it is that 12 persons bring their collective life experience, which is more than one person having to judge the circumstances. There's also an argument, sir, that jurors can make unpopular decisions, in that a judge, if tasked with a very nasty matter to deal with, may be somewhat reticent, even though the law allows it, because of whatever reason, I spoke about the studies, societal pressure, whatever, to render a decision that might be unpopular, while in the instance of having a jury, you collectively spread the responsibility. I think we see a recent example of that in the case of former President Trump in New York, sir. There's also an argument, I was listening to my friend Senator Watson, that juries apparently reduce discrimination. We have discrimination in Barbados, Mr. President. Depends on who you ask, not so? Amen. And then finally, some say that we should jealously guard our rights. Lawyers call it the thin edge you wedge. When you start to chip away at these things, suddenly becomes a little easier. So those are the type of arguments which say that let's leave the jury trial as it is, a fundamental statement and part of the criminal law. Sir, for my part, until we return, I say it's worth a shot. The effective safeguard, of course, being the right of the accused to elect. That's why I think you have so much support. But I want to come back to that first point I made about arraignment, sir. So arraignment is when the process starts, right? And Mr. President, I saw a picture of 3 young men being led out of the courtroom. I wouldn't say where, so nobody could rise on a point of order. They were coming from an arraignment, and one of them was smiling. And it was an arraignment on a very serious charge. And it can't be that we're having a discussion about jury trials and criminal procedure legislation, and we don't recognize what is going on currently in the society. And once again, because we have been here before, Mr. President, I would like to reiterate that the government should look to its citizens and for all of us in here for its support to do what is necessary to stem the tide. I thank you, Mr. President. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. Her Honour, Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I see that my colleague Senator Nichols is keen to speak, and him being a greater expert will get to speak after me. Mr. President, I practiced criminal law for maybe 3 or 4 years. I was admitted in 1987. I say all the time, sir, that despite great preservation of wonderful genes, I'm not a young woman. I was admitted to the bar in 1987, and I was very much a tender little thing in my 20s. Sir, there are many arguments today that I find myself deeply attracted to. There is no doubt that this legislation fundamentally changes our criminal justice system. Whether it is a good change or will prove to be a good change, history will determine. I believe that persons are concerned about the backlog of criminal cases and indictable cases which are caught up in our court system, the difficulty of getting judgments in an early way, and therefore, or for that matter, having closure in a criminal matter if you are the family of someone who has been murdered, if you are rape accused, then 7 years later, you are still waiting for your matter to come to trial, and you are trying to get counseling, or you may not be getting counseling, and you are reliving it, and you always think you're going to face the person who harmed you, and then, you know, the matter is adjourned, and you psych yourself up emotionally, and then it doesn't come off. There are a lot of reasons why it is that we need to expedite the processes in our justice system, and there is a saying that justice delayed is justice denied, and we would not want to deny justice. So really, the use of the trial by judge alone is intended to expedite processes, to create efficiency, to reduce costs in criminal trials, and it is not unique. In fact, one can argue that insofar as non-indictable offenses, that is criminal offenses that don't go before the High Court, are heard and determined by a magistrate alone, that we already have a single judicial presiding officer making decisions within the context of our criminal justice system. So really, there is some sense in which this is not an entirely new introduction into the system. Further, we are aware that it is not new in the Commonwealth. Australia, Canada, Trinidad and Tobago, South Africa, and other countries already have this system in practice. So there's precedent on which we can draw, where we can say it has worked well. Here are the benefits of the system. Here are the things that we must be careful to guard against, etc. Equally, we have to commend the government. I haven't heard it today about efforts made to ensure that criminal cases in Barbados are expedited. The fact that they have increased the number of judges sitting in the criminal courts. The fact that we have moved the number of persons doing transcriptions, because often that was a difficulty in relation to making appeals or getting evidence. The fact that there was not sufficient shorthand writers to begin with, and then the person who did the transcriptions, they moved them from 12 to 27, which is a significant increase. So the government has systematically been taking steps to improve the criminal justice system in Barbados, and this is yet another step in the direction which is hoped to prove beneficial on both sides of the criminal divide, for the wider society, for those who may have been harmed by some criminal enterprise, and certainly to bring to justice those persons who are accused, because they too, especially those who claim innocence, and I have never heard in all the time I practiced criminal law at the bar, never heard anybody admit to being guilty. They always tell you, I'm innocent, it was not me. So, but that's another matter. But there are a few other issues which I want to raise. One is the whole notion of a trial with in the presence of a jury of your peers was supposed to reflect a variety of social perception, a variety of social experiences, a jury of people from various walks of life, various levels of education, various social experiences, various ways of doing things, because we believe that the way we live or that our value system is common to the society. It is not. I remember, for instance, somebody stole one of my dogs. The dog got away and somebody saw it and he said, oh, this is a great looking Rottweiler, pit bull, it should be home at me, and carried it home at them. When I found out who the person was and asked them to return the dog, the person told me how much money I would have to pay them to get back my dog. I was on one of these social media sites, because there are social media sites, for those of you who are animal lovers, that help you to track down lost dogs or runaway dogs and so on, saying to people, look, this is the dog. The dog couldn't have gotten far from home. Somebody had to have taken it. This is the description of the dog. Here's the photographs, etc. And when I said on the site, well, can you believe this individual has my dog and now feels that I should pay them $2,000. They had the dog for 3 days to bring back the dog, or for me to get the dog. They think that this is reasonable. I was horrified. I was first shocked and then horrified at the number of people who said to me, well, you can afford it. 2, well, that was 1. 2, I don't know what it was so wrong with you. If it was my dog, I would be happy enough to pay to get it back alive and well. You lucky enough you get it back, the dog. What you complaining about? So what was the problem really? The body had your dog for 3 days, I feed it and get water, I had it tap, it could be dead. Well, you don't pay any money yourself complaining. You ain't asked for the dog, that's what you was asking for. And they said, I mean, I was stunned at what I thought was a straightforward, simple value matter about somebody stealing my dog. And I'm saying to them, the dog was going down the road peaceful. You pick it up and carry it away. You got it at you. I want my dog. And the person is making a case for why I should pay them to get my dog back. And people in Barbados, a large number of people on the site, supported them. No, this is about values, about how we see issues, about what we think the value of money is, what I am entitled to versus what you are entitled to, what you can take from me and get away with without my being entitled to get it back, even if it is mine. I remember speaking to a client, and this was when I stopped practicing. I got back the dog because, you know, I got back the dog. I remember speaking to a client who was charged with, I can't remember if they'd beaten a person or stabbed the person. And they were trying to explain to me how their action was entirely justified because the person had looked at them disrespectfully. And at that point, I knew that the practice of criminal law was no longer for me, and I stopped practicing Christopher. But the point I want to raise is, depending on where you come from, what your social background is, what your orientation and value system is, your approach to matters could be quite different. And therefore, my question is whether or not our judges sitting alone can so represent and understand the value system and the perspective of accused persons that in the context of the overall facts of the trial, the person can receive justice? That's just a question that I'm raising. I find it, in the context of the experiences which I just shared, really to be a very interesting question. Another argument, but juries have their biases as well, and let's not be in any doubt about that. Another argument, and one that I'm certainly persuaded by, is the fact that a jury, members of a jury, Barbados is a small society. People tend to know you, know where you live, know who you are, know who your family is. And in a situation where people are becoming more violent, more reckless, less caring, and juries can be intimidated and are fearful that making decisions against certain people who are known criminals, known drug lords, where there were eyewitnesses who saw crime take place, that they may be intimidated, juries may be intimidated by the prospect of harm to themselves or to their families, and a judge who arguably has expertise, can better do voir dires, understand technical information, and so on, is far more insulated because of the way they live, the fact that they have orderlies and protection and so on, that they would be more insulated from the prospect of intimidation than would a normal member of the jury. Equally, their remuneration packages are supposed to insulate them from being suborned by criminals in a way that a jury member might take a berry and move and give a more favorable decision. Now that brings me, sir, to the final point that I wish to make, and it is this. I think everybody knows that I have a deep social interest. So apart from the legal issues which arise here and the challenges in transitioning to a new system, I think that there are some social issues which we have to confront, and this legislation raises those social issues. Who are our criminals? What social groups do they come from? What are their social and economic backgrounds? I hear people talk about them being unemployed. I don't think unemployment is necessarily so much the issue. Research has shown in Barbados that a lot of these young men in particular who commit crimes are looking for family life, are looking to be part of something where they feel loved, where they belong, that they can identify with, where they can feel like somebody in a way that they think their educational system or their normal social arrangements do not allow them. Where their families, their mother, their parents, they don't know their fathers, their mothers, their grandmothers may not have treated them well, family members have been abusive. When you look at who our criminals are, when you look at what the research is showing, they've not been to Sunday school, they don't have a sense of God, they don't fear man, and they don't fear God, they don't know who God is. They don't believe in the preservation of life and limb because they don't see its sacredness. It doesn't matter to them that they cannot give life. It empowers them, the notion that they may be able to take it away or to take from you something that is yours that you cannot get back from them. Or they may feel, they may have no understanding at all for how hard you have had to work and continue to work to maintain your standard of living and to acquire the material things that the bank owns. Because invariably, the bank, you have a car note, you have a mortgage, you know, often it is the clothes on your back if you haven't bought them on layaway, or jewelry or appliances. If you haven't bought them on layaway, that is what you own because it's what you have paid off. The rest You are in the process of paying. So really, when they see you doing well, they do not understand what your struggle has been or where you have come from, and therefore what your challenges are. Evidence also shows that invariably those involved in criminal enterprise and the worst criminal activities are persons who have done poorly in our school system. And we had common entrance results coming up in the last few days, and the Honourable Minister expressing concern about the number of young people sitting common entrance and really performing very poorly, that we only get good marks out of roughly 25% of those who sit common entrance. And that makes the case for educational reform, that we have to have an educational system which allows all people, whatever their strengths, whatever their weaknesses, whatever their interests, whatever their social background, whether their families can afford to get home, to pay for homework for them or not, to pay for extra lessons for them or not, that they really have an opportunity at life and to be the best that they can be. And our educational system has to be improved and reformed in order to ensure that we are not manufacturing criminals from as early as the common entrance age, because they cannot fit into the classroom, they cannot fit into the workplace, and they cannot fit into the wider society. And that feeling of not belonging, of social alienation, of being not cared for and not being part of the system, when you learn from 11 that you don't belong, that nobody really wants you, that you have no value, that you are unimportant, that the system can cast you aside like a reject. Then by the time you get to 19, and when you look at the age of these young people, you have to ask yourself, how can a young man at 19 be happy to go to kill somebody? But it is because for years of his life, he has been hearing that he has no particular worth, that the society sees him as nobody and nothing, and therefore he is able to retaliate at the society. And that brings me to the very final point that I want to make. Research also shows that many of our young people engage, in addition to all the factors which I have already mentioned, that many of our young people engaged in criminal enterprise and the most vicious and serious of crimes, whether it is belonging to gangs and drug activity or murders and so on, and other serious crimes, robberies and the like, have poor language skills, that they do not have conflict negotiation or conflict resolution skills, that they are driven by anger as a response because they cannot negotiate. And they cannot negotiate because they do not have the tools, the language tools, the educational skills, the vocabulary, or the sense of retreat when things are being escalated. And this issue of language skills is an important one. The more I go around, sir, people laugh at me. I tell them that I pay all my bills in person every month. I do not do online banking. It has nothing to do with being intimidated by the technology. When I lived in the United States, I did online banking. In Barbados, every month, I go to Water Authority. I go to, well, you'll know then which bills I pay and which bills my husband pays. I go to Water Authority. I go in the bank. I go this place. And I do it deliberately as a politician. And yes, I see myself as a politician. Retiring, but as a politician nonetheless. Because it allows me an opportunity to talk to Barbadians of every social level, to see what their daily experiences are, to see how they are being treated in places where service is provided by the public sector and the private sector, to see the frustrations that they encounter, how service providers can insult and intimidate people who often have no language skills to explain what it is they want, or why it is that they're there, or what the problem is that they have. And increasingly, I go to a nail salon where a lot of working class people are serviced. And again, that is a deliberate choice. I go to rum shops and to places, and I pray. I don't drink. Everybody who knows me know that you can either offer me a Banks malt or a perfect. In fact, there's one particular place where I go that if I call and say I'm on the way, by the time I get there, they will tell me the Coke's in the fridge, in the freezer, because they know that I want a Coca-Cola. And I hear people speaking. A lot of our people can no longer read. They can't read well. In fact, you see it at university, that a lot of the graduates can't write a proper English sentence. They have no understanding of grammar. Their language skills are poor. Their sentence construction is poor. They cannot and do not finish a thought. And when you are speaking with them, they say things like, and so on. And well, you understand what I mean, and so on. They don't finish a sentence because they cannot complete the thought, because they don't have the language skills to articulate it. And if the graduates of university are experiencing that, then those who did not pass common entrance and are at the bottom of the ladder are in a much worse position. So we have a lot of people in Barbados who only speak dialect. They do not speak English. They do not really understand standard English. And when that's a fact, you only have to read social media and the things that people are writing and spelling. They don't know the difference between Y-O-U-R and Y-O-U''RE. No understanding at all that there is a difference. But that is only one example. You read social media, and I mean, there was somebody I had to block from one of my social media pages because trying to understand nothing that they wrote had a full stop or comma. There was no punctuation mark. I could not, I used to get brain fever, as my mother would say. That is a fact. Trying to understand what the person was writing, but they are not unique. When you go across social media, you will see that our language skills are poor. We like to boast about our educational system and how good it is. But the majority of people writing on social media, really you have to be very concerned. So there is a disconnect, I think, in relation to communication, the way people communicate, what they communicate, how they communicate, the language that they use to communicate, and the fact that the dialect is evolving from what we understood it to be 20 or 30 years ago, that there are a lot of new expressions in use, and things have different meanings from what they had before. And it is understood by people who live at a certain level, who are in the majority in this society. And you may ask why I'm making this point, sir. How much more time do I have?
6 minutes.
Great, perfect. Thank you, sir. I make this point in a very deliberate way to connect it with the legislation before the chamber today. Mr. President, I would wish then, having made this point about poor language skills, about people being unable to understand English, about people being unable to write English, about people not speaking English here in Barbados, and I know that people are going to be offended that I've said these things, but people who teach and people who are at the university level can confirm what I'm saying, and you can go anywhere in Barbados, from the fish market to the supermarket to anywhere, to listen to people speaking, to understand the truth, the veracity of what I am saying today and how widespread it is. And so, sir, the legislation. There are two forms that this legislation presents with. No, beg your pardon. Yes, two. Form A, I think, So this is a certificate of waiver of legal advice on electing for a trial by just sitting alone. I, Shaquanda Mears, confirm that I have sought and received advice from the undersigned attorney at law on electing to be tried by judge sitting alone. The undersigned attorney has advised me of my rights, of possible defenses, of the penalties and of the consequences and the implications of electing to be tried by a judge sitting alone. I have had sufficient time to confer with the undersigned attorney at law concerning this mode of trial. I understand the implications of electing and on, one form and the next. I, Shaquan Mears, confirm that I have not sought and received advice from any attorney at law on the matter of me electing to be tried by a judge sitting alone. I have waived my right to consult an attorney for legal advice in relation to a trial by a judge sitting alone. I elect to be tried by a judge sitting alone, and so on. And the accused person is supposed to sign this. And you could imagine you're in handcuffs, a policeman is there, the policemen are armed, whether you feel you're a bad boy. We have learned that you can get on a ZR intending to intimidate a driver and then end up calling for your mother. So you know that some of these people are only posing as bad boys, but really, you know, when the moment of truth comes, they need to find a toilet very quickly. So you are there. The police there, you're in the court, you're in this system that's alien to you, and a person is saying, you can elect to be tried by so-and-so, and they're using language that you have never heard in your life. You have not passed common entrance, you haven't got any certification in school. What does it mean to elect to be tried by this? I mean, what does some of this language mean to accused persons? And we have to get real in relation to how we approach the criminal justice system. And I want to appeal for us to bring linguists into the criminal justice system who can say to accused persons, not just do you understand what this means, but to say to the person, look, he ain't gonna try you, you know. You could get a lawyer. You ain't gonna take it on. And explain to the person what they mean, what is meant by language, in language that has meaning for them, that they understand, to which they can relate, with which they can identify, and then truly choose and exercise their options. But if you stand up and read this as scripted, many accused persons, out of embarrassment, they don't want to say, I can't read. They aren't going to say, I don't know what you mean, especially if you're in a situation where, you know, embarrassment. They're the big bad boy in the community. They are going to admit that they cannot identify two sentences in writing. So we have to find a way to ensure that accused persons understand that there has been an expansion of their rights, that they have options, what those options are, and how they can exercise them. And that cannot happen with the system as it is currently structured, and therefore we need to bring people into the system who will effectively help communicate with these people, with accused persons, and help them to communicate with the courts so that they can really obtain justice. Because for many people in our society, particularly those who are charged with criminal offenses, the reality is that English is a foreign language, and you have to treat it as such if you want to be fair to them. And I'm encouraging, therefore, that that is a system that we implement in order to ensure that our court system generally, but this new election of trial by judge alone, works smoothly and truly to the benefit of accused persons who are intended to benefit from it. Mr. President, sir, that is my contribution.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Senator Nichols. Please turn on your mic.
Mr. President, I'm indeed conscious of the fact that I am literally bringing up the end of the batting. But since we are in the T20 mode, Mr. President, and a semi-final of a World Cup is about to start, I understand the pressure of coming to bat in the 17th over when the score is already looking very good. There has been a surfeit of presentations today on this bill, and indeed, this is little much for me to add based on what I had already prepared. But I thought that I should lend my voice to the debate and to lay some emphasis on some different parts of the bill based on the research that I have done. And sir, I think that it is fair to say that the discussion about judge-alone trials in Barbados started even before the present administration. And I think the first person I heard speaking about this was the former Chief Justice Marston Gibson, speaking about it at a session for the commencement of the Supreme Court year a number of years ago. And certainly I recall that he has been a proponent of it. But certainly the government, in taking up the realm of administration in 2018, having to deal with a number of issues, recognized that the criminal justice system, like a number of the systems that we have in the country, have not been looked at for many, many, many years. The criminal justice system has been characterized by unacceptable delays and complexity, to which Senator Thompson spoke to some of those issues. And this delay, or these systemic delays in the system, leads to blurred accountabilities as it relates to the accused persons, the lawyers, the prosecution, the police services, and the people who, the transcriptionists. The entire system is affected by these delays. And there's a significant amount of time and effort unnecessarily goes into what is really a straightforward case. But the systemic delay that we suffer from in our criminal justice system has been problematic. And the government has adopted a whole of government approach to deal with this matter in terms of the reform of the criminal justice system. And the leader of government business in the Senate has alluded to the fact that a number of pieces of legislative changes will be coming to us in the coming months to deal with these issues. Sir, for the victims and witnesses involved in criminal matters, this system is baffling and frustrating. For the accused persons, Mr. President, it is stifling and frustrating. This bill, therefore, in my view, has to be assessed on the basis on how do we make our criminal justice system more fair and more efficient. That is the overall goal. Raising the standards of how the system operates, improving the effectiveness of the system, being able to do what a criminal justice system is designed to do. How do we increase the public confidence of the courts? And I will draw some references to why I think that this bill will, in time, be one of the standard bearers for raising public confidence in the justice sector. So that the improvement of the rules and the procedures is important. And I recall in April last year, there was a judicial symposium, a symposium on criminal justice reform in Barbados, attended by the entirety of the practitioners of the criminal bar, the judges, and a number of members of the Bar Association. I think, Mr. President, you were at that presentation, and it was scheduled to be on one day. And by the middle of the first day, it was decided by all participants. I believe it was at the Hilton, if I'm not mistaken. It was agreed that we have to come back and meet the next day because we're not leaving here until we get all of the challenges aired out by all sides, the prosecutors, the criminal defense attorneys, the police service, the judges, everyone came together. We looked at the challenges to the criminal justice system. We looked at judge-alone trials, Mr. President. We looked at the criminal procedure rules, evidence in investigations and in trials. We looked at victim and witness care over 2 days. This bill comes out of a consensus achieved as a result of the discussions and deliberations. And it's true that not everyone is in favor of judge-alone trials. And even then, when we had the symposium last year, not everyone was in favor of it then. But I judge this bill before us for consideration on the basis that at least it meets the standard of the principal constitutional right to the protection of the law. That is the fundamental basis upon which we should judge any legislation for its constitutionality. I also believe, Mr. President, that the constitutional right to a fair trial within a reasonable time by a fair and independent and impartial court established by law is also enhanced by this. And I will give the examples and reasons why, Mr. President. Now, we heard some criticism as to whether or not people's constitutional rights are being infringed by this. And I think Senator Boyce did raise it, that there was some concern and disquiet in the community that this legislation may have offended persons' rights to a trial by their peers or trial by a jury. But since 1978, the Privy Council has established in a case called Trevor Stone and the Queen that a trial by a judge alone, a case out of Jamaica, since 1978 does not infringe the constitutional right to a fair and impartial court. A trial by a fair and impartial court established by law. So let us get that out of the way. In fact, indeed, the learned Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago had to make the same argument when they were introducing the bill in Trinidad, because it was this attempt to distort and create this notion that somehow the government is trying to take away the rights. And it is important to reiterate that this bill, before us for consideration, gives the right of election to the person who is accused of a crime. When you plead not guilty, the judge must inform you that it is your right to elect. So this is not taking away anyone's rights. When we look at the bill, Mr. President, I am satisfied that the bill makes adequate provision for people to seek legal advice. Now, I have seen some discussion about whether or not a person who comes to the court on arraignment has no lawyer, but certifies that he or she has read the certificate, signed it, and said that I'm proceeding without a jury. Now, Mr. President, many days in the magistrates' courts, in the criminal matters, in fact, the public might not be aware, but all criminal matters start in the magistrates' courts. The matters are either summary trials which are done by the magistrate, there are either indictable matters which are done by judge and jury, and there are some matters that are triable either way. And in that area where they're triable either way, the magistrate has to tell the accused person that you have a right for the magistrate to deal with the trial by me here in the magistrate's court or by a judge and jury. And I dare say and suggest that that election of determining whether a matter is tried by the magistrate in the magistrate's court or goes upstairs is the same considerations will arise where an accused person has to determine whether the trial should be by judge alone or by jury. And we have not seen any large, perhaps the data is not there, but we have not seen any large amount of complaints that people who have to go before a magistrate and make that determination on the spot, sometimes without an attorney at law present. Some of them might not have an attorney. And ordinary Barbadians say, I can take my chances with you, sir. Every day in Barbados, So that this notion that the legislation is, we have to be very careful of importing into our culture a legislation that is going to place people at some particular disadvantage because they suddenly have an election to make about their fate. Happens every day in the magistrate's court. People have to make a determination as to whether this case is going to be done by the magistrate or it goes up. Many offenses in Barbados are triable either way, either by summary, trial before the magistrate, or indictable. So that the notion that this bill before us is now importing into the criminal justice system something that we need to be fearful and watchful about is not accurate. Mr. President, the Honourable Senator spoke about the advantages of jury trials and the disadvantages, and they also spoke about the advantages of judge-alone trials and disadvantages. I think I want to examine a number of these. We hear about the advantages of the jury trial by peers. Wide range of perspectives are put together in a room. It is better to be judged by 9 or 12 people than by 1, and so forth. But there are also some disadvantages, because I have not done a lot of criminal matters in the High Court, but I have done a few. And the last time I think I appeared in the criminal assizes was in 2015. And I vividly remember some of the reasons why I decided why I'm not going back down there. But that is another issue. But I think I need to raise these issues for consideration. I have observed in my time, Mr. President, a victim of a grievous sexual crime in an October assizes being a juror in the January assizes of a grievous sexual crime in Barbados. See that? How could the person accused of a grievous sexual crime in the January trial have a fair trial if one of the jurors was the virtual complainant 2 months before? It happens. I stood here in a previous iteration and made the point that I've seen jury picnics attended by court marshals, clerks of the court. At the end of the assizes, they go down Box Rock or wherever I have these lines. I've seen a jury give a judge a pen for 100% convictions during assizes. That they're working together, judge and jury, in Barbados. And I said that many years ago, Mr. President, and only to be met with the sternest of consternation by the clerks when I got back to practice in my civil practice, because that was an observation I made as a young lawyer when I did some criminal work. And I said, this thing is inherently and patently unfair. But we speak about the jury system as if this is the only thing that is there to service people. But we have some prejudices and some realities that we need to deal with in our society. And let me give you an example of one. I once represented a client who is now deceased, who stole a bottle of rum, $7 from a supermarket. He worked in government. He went before the magistrate, was convicted, reprimanded, and discharged. Nothing written against him in terms of his record. Got in an argument with somebody at work. He worked in government. And a year later, he was fired because he was convicted. They couldn't reconcile how they got to recommend to Her Excellency, the Governor General, that this man should be fired because there's no conviction recorded against the man. And I instinctively said, I think this is a good case. And the junior lawyer who was working with me said, man, you shouldn't take that case, that man is a thief. Lawyer, trained in the law, not able to separate that the process by which he lost his job was a separate and distinctive matter from a conviction in which the presiding officer did not record a conviction against him because, for the reasons that that judicial officer felt, I am not recording a conviction against this man. But a lawyer felt, man, we should not take this case, refused to do anything on the matter. But the records show what happened. And I'm just making that point that we have some innate and inherent biases and prejudices against certain people. And this feeds into the same jury system that we are saying that is so infallible. It is not so, Mr. President, and that is not my experience. Mr. President, I'm told by my colleagues at the criminal bar that there are WhatsApp chats in the jury, and that judges can be heard, or I say judges because I don't want to particularize anybody. So saying when the juries are being put together, at the beginning, no jury is being impaneled, but all y'all give your numbers to the clerk and we create a WhatsApp chat. Nowhere in the world, Mr. President, can that. I understand that may be for administrative efficiency and trying to coordinate things, etc., but how could that be fair and just? Because no one can control what is said in that jury chat, even by inadvertence. Even if somebody utters some kind of comment about cricket or something like that. You're not supposed to be colluding and collaborating with each other. So that, let us get real. And that is why I am a large proponent of the judge alone trials. Because even if the judge is pro-prosecution, and there's an argument that we take a lot of our judges from the who work for the state, who are former prosecutors, and make them judges, and that they're biased. I look at this legislation, this bill, and I've examined it. And there's a key section in here that hasn't been really mentioned by anybody that tells me that this will be the savior of justice in Barbados. Mr. President, I speak to the fact that judges now have to give reasons for the decision. And I don't want to pettifog the issue about reasons. I know the senators have mentioned it, but I take a point of departure that this requirement in the law will now make it easier for a person to go before a judge who may appear biased. But the requirements under the law now, the judge has to give reasons for the decision, and this is not just any flimsy reasons. And I will explain it, Mr. President. Now, the judge must now deliver these reasons 14 days after the close of the case. And I've heard that this has been raised as a legitimate concern. I don't think it's a concern, and I'll tell you why. During a criminal case, the judge ordinarily takes notes, and the transcriptionist provides a record of the daily proceedings at the end of the day to the lawyers on both sides. At least when I was there in 2015, that was what happened. So when you go to court the next morning, you get a full transcription of the proceedings on the day before. That may not always happen. I don't know what happens now. But the judge takes his or her own notes. At the end of the case, the prosecution's case, the defendant's case starts, the accused case. He may choose not to call evidence or make a statement from the dock. Then the lawyers sum up the case. At the end of the summation, the lawyer's addresses to the jury, the judge sums up the case. And the judge sums up the case on the basis of the notes that the judge has taken. The judge has to meticulously go through all of the evidence of each witness and instruct the jury as to what was said, instruct the jury as to the issues of fact to be determined by them, and to warn the jury about the issues of law that is to be determined by the judge. And the judge has to give that summation. No, the judge will not have to give a summation where there is no jury. So the time spent by the judge during the process of the criminal trial, because the judge is not sitting down up there on the bench, he doesn't have to take full notes because there's a transcription, he's just cooling out, listening for objections of sustained. Not like how you see me, a judge has real work to do during the course of the criminal trial. And the same time that the judge will take to prepare their summation to the jury is actually the same time that a judge will prepare their judgment. So I'm not as fearful as some of my colleagues, that this is not creating some additional burden on the judges, because the judges have to sum up the entirety of the case for the benefit of the jury, which they will not have to do under this legislation. So that the issue about time and the 14 days may not necessarily, because judges will tell you, well, after the case is done, we can't wait to just go a long trial, several witnesses, the jury in panel, you want to move on to another case. How is it then you can spend, not months, if that's not the case within the criminal bar? So that time will not be lost, and it will be used now by the judges to hone in to their judgment. So I don't believe that that is a large problem. And when the judge is unable to render that verdict, that decision, because if it's an acquittal, person goes, if there's a guilty verdict, they have to explain it. When the judge fails to give the judgment, the bill provides for the judge to convene the court and inform the parties of the need for further time required to complete the decision. At the end of the day, the accused person is entitled to a trial within a reasonable time, and that means also the conclusion of the matter. That is the constitutional right, which the overarching right. So we need to place these things within context and not necessarily excite fears that we hear about the backlogs and judges not giving decisions and so forth. I don't think it would be fair to the criminal judges in Barbados to invite people now to feel that this will now be the same situation where they're civil in the civil courts. Because the criminal judges, or the judges of the criminal courts in our high courts in Barbados, do yeoman service to sitting down through a whole criminal trial and being able to properly sum up the good and bad arguments of both sides have to be put to the jury. And they do that right now. So I don't have that fear, Mr. President. But let me get into the meat of the matter in the rest of my presentation, Mr. President. Senator Watson made the point, and I agree. What does guilty beyond all reasonable doubt mean to the average layman? Every lawyer might know it. We had to learn criminal law at UE and criminal practice and procedure at law school. We understand what that means. And judges have to explain it to juries, and I've sat down in courts all the time, and there's no one of the juries have to come back and ask the judge, I want your direction on this, I want your direction on that. But what does beyond a reasonable doubt mean? We hear all the time, we hear it on television, we hear it in movies, but the significance of that important. And that is why the studies in New South Wales have shown that there is a 12% increase in probability of an acquittal by judge on trial. Because judges understand the law, and that is a legal point within the factual domain of the jury. But it is still a legal point. The slightest scintilla of doubt has to be resolved in the favor of the accused person. That is what it means. Beyond a reasonable, but what is reasonable in the circumstances? Is everybody emotionally and educationally and socially adept to understand the standard and the flexibility of that standard of reasonableness? And the questions of doubt, because there may be some doubt, but it may not be a reasonable one. But what is reasonable for me is not reasonable for you. So that is why the exactitude of that standard in other jurisdictions has made way for the probability of more acquittals over a long period of time. Mr. President, this provision in respect of reasons requires the judge to give more than a bare statement of the relevant principles of law and the findings of fact. Judges can't now be flippant about why there's an acquittal because the prosecution will have a basis to appeal, or why there's a conviction because the accused person will have the basis of an appeal. And we've seen even in Trinidad in recent times where a judge on trial's verdict has been overturned by the Court of Appeal. So the adequacy of reason, so judges now can't hide behind. I've seen judges summing up the case to the jury. Well, Mr. Nichols has said so, but y'all can believe him if you all want, y'all can believe him if you want. But when the judge in the Court of Appeal reading that on the record, he said all the things that should be said. But you don't see the intonation in the voice and the body language, basically telling the jury, I don't believe him. Mr. Nichols has talked about those stones, but those stones are not part of the case. But they were part of the case because the police tried to enter them into evidence and couldn't find the signature on the tab because they were the wrong stones. But the eyewitness to the murder said, he pelt that rock, Bam Bam pelt that rock and dropped it on his head. That was the rock. I don't have to identify my signature on it. But it was the wrong stone. But the judge said, do not mind Mr. Nichols. Those stones are not part of the case. What do you know about that? But when you got the judge now have to evaluate the evidence. And why the police can say that they brought the wrong stones and the major eyewitness, the only eyewitness to this murder, says, I don't need to see my signature on any tape. That is the rock that Bam Bam dropped on the man's head. He can't get away with that in a judge alone trial because he has now to give an account for the inconsistency in the evidence. And so what is he going to do about the lady? She's obviously lying. And he has now to get around that fact that the major eyewitness, so that I am not as fearful. This provision exposes the judge's reason to a process that has to link now the law and the factual findings. The judgment has to properly identify and record all the elements and ingredients of the offense and why each element has been established or not established in the evidence, and then the appropriate legal standards applied. Now, juries cannot necessarily understand the distinction between an issue of fact, an issue of law, or an issue of mixed fact and law. There are certain directions that judges have to give to the jury that law students on the first and sometimes on the second attempt will not get it right even at law school because the law is complex. But you have to tell the jury that if it's not murder, you must consider manslaughter, and if not, what are the defenses to manslaughter that are different to the defenses in murder. And these are issues of fact that you all have. If you believe the accused person, you have to all that balancing. This is not, and that is why I feel that even with a biased judge, the impediment, or I should not say the impediment, the requirement that the judge must now settle the evidence properly, identify and record all of the elements of the offenses, even where there's circumstantial evidence. Now, matters of fact are matters for the jury alone. We hear that all the time. But there's not always direct evidence of the commission of the offense. Sometimes the prosecution's case rests solely on circumstantial evidence. What is circumstantial evidence? Any layman know? Circumstantial evidence is evidence of inferences that can be drawn from the evidence that may lead to a certain conclusion, but that is the only conclusion that is left on the table when everything is stripped away. It is not easy for juries to always understand the value of circumstantial evidence because not all crimes are committed in broad daylight in the glare of the full public. Where there is circumstantial evidence, now the judge must address all of the defense hypotheses. And if he's going to find the person guilty, he then has to discount why that hypothesis is not the only conclusion and not give a flimsy reasoning for that verdict. The judge's reasons must also resolve materially disputed facts and factual questions on the evidence. Two people go, like I saw in the thing, one man was holding the knife at the door and the other man threw a bomb. Joint enterprise. All these are, what are the facts? Do the facts lead to the legal standard of establishing joint enterprise? These are things now that the judges now have to, just can't throw it to the jury and say the jury will believe the accused or the prosecution and then. No, the judges don't have the work to do. So that my reading of this bill suggests to me that there is a serious onus now on the criminal courts where there is a judge alone trial, where you can't just say, well, it was up to the jury to believe which lawyer presented the case, or which witness was more convincing, or which witness appeared more credible or compelling. You have to make that evaluation yourself, and you have to set it out. Findings of fact, findings of law. So that, Mr. President, I wholeheartedly support this bill. I understand why Barbados is now moving towards where Antigua and Barbuda, where Trinidad, where the Bahamas and other countries in the Caribbean, Jamaica, have gone. This is not taking the Barbadian people into the dark, hoping that we can get this system working right. This is a good bill. It satisfies all of the reasonable tests that one could bring for legislation of this type. It is in keeping with the requirements of the protection of the law. As I always say in this place, the law can't rule if it can't protect. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Senator Cummins, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm not sure that on this occasion that wrapping up is what is required of me, Mr. President. I believe that we have had 4 solid legal presentations on the bill before us, first by Senator Watson, followed by Senator Boyce, of course, Senator Thompson in her own inimitable style, and Senator Nichols brought it home with a detailed elaboration on the merits of the bill and the wider considerations that gave rise to what is covered within this legislation, Mr. President. And it is on that basis that I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now lead the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Didn't bring that up.
Clause 1.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 1 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 do now stand part. All honourable senators in favour please say aye. Aye. And those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 3 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 4 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 5 stand part.
The question is that Clause 5 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 6 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 6 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 7.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 7 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 7 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 8.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 8 stand part.
The question is that Clause 8 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it.
Clause 9.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 9 stand part.
The question is that Clause 9 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Will all honourable senators against please say nay? The ayes have it.
Clause 10.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 10 do now stand part.
Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye because the question is
That Clause 10 stand.
that Clause 10 do not stand part. All honourable. Yes. Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be now the second schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Report.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
The President has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. We think the ayes have it. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as a Criminal Procedure Amendment Act 2024.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as a Criminal Procedure Amendment Act 2024. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
I'd like to revert to order number 7.
Order number 7 reverted.
Commit order number 7.
Order number 7.
Move that you go into committee. And leave the chair.
Monroe Light.
Mr. President, I do ask that Your Honour now leave the chair and for the chamber to resume in committee.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable Senate be turned to committee for further consideration of this bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Recommit part one of the bill.
Madam Chair, I beg to move an amendment to clause 2 of part 1. That amendment is to the definition of blue economy. And that amendment would read that blue economy means the sustainable use of ocean resources to benefit economies, livelihoods, and the preservation or regeneration of ocean ecosystem health. Yeah, ecosystem health. Mr. President, Madam Chair, I also move an amendment to the definition of green economy. That amendment would read that green economy means the kind of economy that reduces environmental risk and ecological threats or dangers by encouraging economic activity that preserves or regenerates the environment.
The question is that there be 2 amendments in the definition section. The first being to blue economy. The definition should be, and I quote, that blue economy means the sustainable use of ocean resources to benefit economies, livelihoods, and the preservation or regeneration of ocean ecosystem health. Will all honourable senators in favour of the amendment please say aye? Aye. Will all honourable senators against the amendment please say no? The ayes have it. The second amendment, and I'll quote, green economy means the kind of economy that reduces environmental risks and ecological threats or dangers by encouraging economic activity that preserves or regenerates the environment. Will all honourable senators in favour of the amendment please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Recommitted.
Madam Chair, I beg to move an amendment to Part 3, Clause 28, which will remove the reference to 100 million and substitute with a reference of 500 million.
The question is that Clause 28 of the bill be amended to remove the words 100 million and substitute therefore the words 500 million. Will all honourable senators in favour of this amendment please say aye? Aye. Will all honourable senators against this amendment please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee as amended.
We did this amendment on. Okay, I didn't remember it being approved, okay. The question is, Vanessa? The question is that I do now report to His Honor, the President, the passing of one bill in committee as amended. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the pass of one bill in committee with amendments. Senator Mamrone.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and be cited as the Barbados Blue-Green Bank Act 2024.
The question is that this bill will now pass and be cited as the Barbados Blue-Green Bank Act 2024. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Honourable senators, please be advised that I have taken note of the amendments made, and the usual message will be transmitted to the Honourable, the House of Assembly, inviting their members' concurrence with the amendments to the bill.
It does not.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to, before I suspend today's sitting, I want to express my appreciation. I know the hour is late. I want to express my appreciation to all honourable senators for their commitment in being here today. Those of us who were here since morning, but I also want to single out my own colleague, Senator Chad Blackman, who has been out for the last 24 hours, landed right off of an 8-hour flight and came directly to the Senate. That is what the Barbados Labour Party government is about. We come to do business. I'm appreciative of you being here nonetheless, and hope you get some rest tonight because you got cabinet tomorrow. So. But I beg to move now that we suspend today's sitting until 11 a.m. on Friday.
The question is that this sitting of the Honourable Senate is suspended until 11 a.m. on Friday, June 28th, 2024. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Thanks, the ayes have it. The sitting is therefore suspended until Friday, June 28th at 11 a.m.